Hilltowners, it's me, Tracy. I'm having a very busy month. And I found myself sort of stuck in a space where I had no idea what I was going to do next. And I know we all get like that from time to time. And it occurred to me that sometimes we all need to have a little encouragement and, perhaps just a jumping off place. Which kind of led me to this project. So this one is called Have Faith. And I like these little inspirational boards. I have them everywhere, just little notes to myself to um, remind myself to be grateful, to remind myself of a bunch of different things. And in this particular case, to remind myself to have a little faith. So when I had that thought in mind, I thought it would be really fun just to do something really loose, something really simple, without a whole pile of massive difficult technique, and just have a little bit of fun with some basics. So I decided that I'm going to do this tattoo style. This is all based on a Asian form of tattoo. It's very loose. The colors are light and airy and watery and very translucent, which made me think of something else. And then, things just happened from there. So I decided on this little breadboard. I really like this surface because it sits up nicely on a small little easel, and you can tuck it into a corner. It can sit on the corner of your desk, or it can sit on a windowsill. It's a really nice little surface. It's a simple one to work with. We're going to do a simple textured background. It's visual texture. And then we're going to use some stamps. We're going to use some fluid acrylic. I don't do this often because I know they're difficult to find. You can do this with your Americanas, but I'm going to do it with the fluid acrylic. I love these colors. And I decided to stick with a very basic palette. I went with a cobalt teal hue, which is this blue. You can use a primary magenta. I am out of it, so I decided to use the quinacridone magenta instead. A little bit of green gold, because I love those bright, bright greens. So we have that. And then to shade that, we have this fabulous sap green. I love this green. It's so rich. And then one of the things that's in the fluid acrylics that you don't find in too many paint lines is this. It's a translucent white. And this is going to work heavily in our favor. So we're going to be working with it. I love my Jo Sonja's Fast Dry Glaze, so that's what we're going to add to it. As for the base color, good old-fashioned Americana lamp black. I love it. It's nice and dark, covers well, and then it dries to this beautiful matte finish. So we're going to work with that as our base. And then, of course, I have to have my warm white because that's my all-time favorite white. And a little bit of asphaltum because, I can't paint without asphaltum either. So, pretty minimal palette. I've got a couple of stamps. This one is one of my favorites. It's called Vintage Note. We have these on my website. And these are just some cancellation stamps from my grunge set, which are also a favorite. Those are also available on my website. Plus a Stays-On stamp pad. And I use the jet black. You can use just Americana paint if you want to, but I'm going to use the Stays-On for this. Now, the background for this is built on a contrast. And so we're going to work with a little bit of warm whites. And I'm using one of my Fugly brushes. This is actually called a Dynasty Encaustic Oval. It's a natural hair brush. They're very coarse, which is why I like them. And you can tell why I call it a Fugly brush, because they get pretty fugly. So I'm going to put some white on. And I kind of like this dry look where you get bits of that black showing through. This works really well for things like barn board and whatnot, but in this particular case, I don't want it to be too black, but I want to see quite a bit of that in there. It's going to create some interesting textures in this. So I love how this looks, always have, but I want a fairly bright background, so I don't want to have too much. But I like that vertical pattern that it creates by putting it on this way. And I have control over this. And I think I'm happy. I've got lots of patterns showing up in this. So I'm going to dry that real quick. This part is super fun. And again, this is not a difficult piece to paint. I'm going to be working with a simple line drawing. It's a sketch, actually, of a Japanese peony that was done for a tattoo. Someone had asked me to design, and I really liked the sketch, and I just think that it's quite pretty, and it lends itself well to this particular theme. So we're going to transfer that on, and I'm going to just position this nicely so that it seats inside my surface, and a little bit of masking tape just to hold it in place. And I'm going to use some dark graphite for this. I want to be able to really see this quite clearly. Now, when I put this together, I had the notion that not everyone is going to want to do brush lettering on their piece. Some people are comfortable with it, others not so much. So what I did was I provided you with a bunch of different sayings, actually. I chose have faith, but I put a few others in. But I also have them in a smaller format so that you can cut them out and decoupage them onto the surface if you prefer. And the instructions for that are also in your pattern. So I've got my line drawing in place. I'm going to use my red gel pen because I like being able to see where I've been. It just makes life a whole bunch easier. And you can apply firm pressure, but you don't have to work hard to get this on there. But we do want a nice clean outline, just so that everything shows up on that textured background. This is such a simple technique. It's a good way to practice floating. It's a good way to practice values, developing values. But at the same time, it's just a nice piece to have fun with. I don't like complex design work a lot of the time, and people get very frustrated with it, especially if it's, perhaps not quite in their skill set yet. It can be frustrating, and it takes the joy out of it if whatever you're painting, all it does is create frustration. And heavens, we don't want that. This is supposed to be a pleasure. So I'm just going to quickly trace this on, and then we're going to get right to painting it. The fun part about this is that we're essentially just adding shadows to this, much like a tattoo artist does. He adds values to things. So they put in a general outline of their design, and then they fill it in with color, and we're going to do just that, but in a very simplified method. So it's just shading and highlighting for this piece. No base coating per se, except for that background color. That's it. And we're going to have a little bit of fun with adhesive and gold. That's always fun. There, I think I'm going to trace my lettering on, and if I decide to adhere it, I can, but if I decide to paint it, I can do that too. So, and I think I'm going to paint mine. It tends to be my go-to. I love doing painted lettering. I just love how it looks. I've had a love affair with lettering since I was a kid. I could spend hours practicing my handwriting or my lettering. The sisters would give us books that had the grids all marked in so that we could practice making every single letter over and over and over again. And for me, it was fun. For a lot of people, they hated it, but I loved it. And it's the same with decorative painting. I loved the whole notion of practicing all those strokes. That part really appealed to me because it had that same feel to it. There. Excellent. And I missed a petal on my flower. Right there. So make sure everything is done. Excellent. So we have this lovely texture background. I love this visual texture in things. So I'm going to work with a nice big angled shader. In this case, I'm using a 1/2 inch. This is a Dynasty Water Lily. I love these brushes for this. And I have my little dish full of Jo Sonjas. I like the fast dry glaze. It helps make the colors transparent, but doesn't overly affect the pigmentation. So I can thin the color without actually diluting it, which is a big deal. So our first step here is to add color to our background. We're going to do that with this 1/2 inch angle. And I'm going to load it up with a little bit of that cobalt teal hue, which is this beautiful teal turquoise color. And I'm going to float that color all the way around into those little tight areas around my peony. I'm going to make sure that it doesn't go over top of some of these leaves. And I'm going to walk that color out because I want this color to come out a little ways. Such a pretty blue. And you can make this as strong as you like or as weak as you like. So if you prefer the more soft, delicate, heavily translucent color, then by all means, let it be transparent. And if you like the color a bit more bold, don't be shy. The nice part about doing it this way is that the more layers you put on, the more brilliant the colors get, the more depth you get. So you are not relegated to trying to get it all done in one go. And I love these colors. Such a brilliant, brilliant blue. So if you want that color strong, don't be afraid to pop some in. And look how pretty that is already. I love this color. Love, love, love. And again, you have complete control over it. You can let it get as dark as you want, as light as you want. You can walk it all the way out. It can have texture. It can be smooth and watery. Entirely up to you. And I love this color. And don't forget to take some of that color up the edges here. Look at that. Look how pretty that is. And do the same thing out here. You can let that color do a little bit of the work. So pretty. So I'm going to dry this real quick. And then we're going to put our stamps and our stencils to use. What are stamps? I'm a fan. I do love my stamps. I like what it does for backgrounds. I love what it does for edges. So I'm going to start with my little cancellation stamps because I have a minor obsession with cancellation stamps. So I don't know what it is, but I have to have a cancellation stamp on almost everything. I have no idea why. I really like what they add or what they bring to it. I have no clue why, but it just appeals to me. So I've only put a couple in because I don't want this to get super busy, but I'm going to take my stamp. This is my vintage note stamp, and I'm only putting a little bit on. I love this because I can pick and choose how much of it I want on there. I can use little bits if I want. I can use lots of it if I want. And I think I'm happy with that. I don't want it everywhere because I think it'll might get a little too busy, and I don't want that. So I've got a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be legible. That's an important thing to remember. You don't have to have it absolutely perfect. So it does look a little busy. It's okay. By the time we're done, it's all going to fall into that background quite nicely. So fun. Just make sure my ink is nice and dry. Now, the fun part about this is you can do the stamping at any time. It doesn't have to be done right away. It can be done after the color is on. It can be done before you put the line drawings on. You can do it whenever you want to, or not at all if you don't want to. That's the fun part. So next, I'm going to start adding some color to these leaves because I can, and I want to, because I love this green. This is the green gold. So if you're working with Americanas, you can grab yourself some margarita green, or you can grab matcha green, any high yellow or citron, like a great new color they have is Sprout. That works beautifully on this. So I'm just putting in a wash of that green gold. I've thinned it out with a little bit of glaze. I'm using the Jo Sonja. You can do this with water. Does not have to be a glaze. It can be done with water. And I like this basic palette, this very minimalized palette, for a couple of reasons. One, you don't have to have 5 million colors in your paint box to do this, which can stop a lot of people if you don't have exactly the right color. I'm of the opinion that as long as it's close, it's good. So you don't need to have exactly the same colors. I think it stops a lot of us from doing things and being creative when we go, oh, I don't have the right color. I don't have that color. And I don't think that that is necessary. So I'm just pulling a little of that blue around the edges, like so. I love this color. And I like letting it get a little dark in places. It just adds nice tone and texture to things. And I love this color palette in particular is very happy. It's a very positive color palette. It's got this nice bright blue, and then these lovely pinks, and these gorgeous greens, and it's a nice color palette. So now I'm just going to sort of slip slap a little more blue in, just so that I have blue in most places. And then I'm going to come back in close to my flower and put another float of that blue in, so it's a little bit darker around the flower. There we go. I'm liking it. There. Pretty pretty. I love that blue. It's very pretty. So we're going to dry this real quick, and then we're going to start working on the flower itself, which I don't have primary magenta. I have quinacridone magenta, which means it's going to be a little more saturated. The quinacridones have this just great vibrancy to them. And I'm going to switch to my smaller angled shader. I'm going to be using a 3/8 for this. I love that this is just a very simple palette. So quinacridone magenta is really vibrant. It has almost a touch of violet in it. It doesn't really, but it has this great vibrancy. Now I'm going to start with the petals towards the back. And I'm going to put a float of that quinacridone magenta in there. Just like that. Isn't that a gorgeous color? And I'm going to use my mop just to soften some of these little areas here. Love this color. So there's that quinacridone. What a vibrant pink. And I'm going to put another float. Now I like starting at the petals at the back because they're the furthest away. And it's so much easier to get really great floats in when you do that. I'm going to rinse my brush because I seem to have gotten too much paint in it. There we go. I had a lot of paint and none of it was in the right place. And it wasn't quite dark enough back there, so let's clean that up. So pretty. So we're just going to continue floating in this gorgeous pink into the deepest areas of these petals back here and work towards the center. This is a really easy way to practice your floating. And it's very forgiving. There we go. Choo, 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 choo. So this flower comes together pretty quickly. And it's, as I said, it's a pretty forgiving method. Now, the fun part about this is that this will translate really, really nicely to a variety of other surfaces. It translates very nicely to other line drawings. So if you have, just like for instance, a coloring book, anything with just a plain basic outline, you can do this. And it's a very pretty technique. It just looks very watery and soft. And we're almost there. So I'm going to finish shading up underneath these petals like so. And we've got a little fold here that needs a shadow like so. And then I'm going to come into the middle here. Now the fun part about this middle is that you can treat all of it as one piece. And then you're just going to shade under each of those petals where they overlap. Like so. So it's not overly complex. Do have a little spot here in the center of the flower that we can play with a little bit. I'm going to use my little round. And there's this little open spot in the center of the flower. Essentially, it's where you would see the petals underneath these petals. So I'm just going to put a little bit of quinacridone in there, just to darken it up. And we're ready for the next step. And our next step is to add some highlights to our peony. Just deepen a couple of things there. So we can start adding some highlights, and that's where that translucent white comes into play. I know, it sounds odd. We're always trying to make white more opaque. And in this particular case, this translucent white's really going to work in our favor. So we're going to get the brightness of a white, but it's going to let all of those textures and whatnot underneath our flower show up. So I'm putting a highlight of that translucent white just at the upper edges of the petals, like so. So it helps these petals jump off of that surface. It's not opaque because you can still see everything underneath it. But it's going to give us those lights that we need, those lighter values that we need. It's going to help you clean up any rough and imperfect edges. So you get areas that are just perhaps less than what you would like to see. And these little bits of white at the edge is going to give you that nice crisp edges to the petals. And do you see what I mean? You can still see all the stamping right through that petal, but you get the highlight. So we get the brighter highlights, but we can still see all of those textures, that stamping and whatnot, right through it. I love little pieces like this, small techniques. They would just do wonders. So look at that. So we've got all our outer petals done already. It's a very quick and easy method. So there's that definition that we want. And then this brings us into that center portion of it. And we're going to treat that the same way we treated the rest of the petals. You're going to give it a nice little highlight at that upper edge. Just like so. And there, look how pretty that is. And it pulls together really, really fast. So now that we've got all those highlights in place on the edges of those petals, we're going to take that round brush and we're going to thin a little bit of that translucent white, and we're going to just paint in these flip overs, these turnovers in some of these petals. Just going to paint them with a little bit of that translucent white. Don't overdo it. There's no need to worry too much about getting it absolutely perfect. We still have a little bit of work to do. And this is just a fun technique. So we have our peony. I've got a couple of things I want to adjust. There we go. Very pretty. So we're going to shade all of those leaves, and we're going to do that with that sap green. This is a really, really gorgeous green. It's very dark, very rich, but it's transparent. And so it lets you control things quite nicely. So I'm using a little bit of that sap green to shade the base of my leaves. And I do this a lot. I just shade the base where it joins the stem. So that's my first and foremost concern. Get that shadow in there. Don't you love that you can still see all that texture through there? All that stuff in the background, you can still see it. It just makes things so much more interesting. And there's that little float. I call it a C-shaped or a U-shaped float at the base of the stems, or the base of the leaves, pardon me. It helps shape it. It helps define those petals and the leaves really nicely. And then once they're dry, I'm going to dry this real quick. We're going to shade down the center vein with another float of that plantation pine. Just bring it out to the point. Just like that. Again, don't worry too much about whether or not they're perfect, because honestly it doesn't matter. It's just an opportunity to work on them, on those floats. And these leaves are supposed to be a little loose. There we are. And you can deepen them at any time. So there we have all those leaves in. We have our peony done. But now we're going to deepen some of this. So I'm going to use a little bit of thin Asphaltum. And I pick up just a small amount, fair amount of glaze or water in my brush. I only pick up a small amount of Asphaltum. All I'm doing is toning this a little bit. The color is not full strength. It is thinned out considerably. I don't want it full strength. I don't want to kill all that yummy color. I just want to tone it a little bit. Look at that. I love how these colors look with that little bit of Asphaltum over top. It just brings them to life. Look at that. And it helps you separate petals a little bit. And it helps you define some edges a little bit. And it warms up this. We're working with very cool tones in here. This blue is cool. This red is actually a cool red. It leans, because of the violet, it leans into the cooler values. And I like to warm things up just a little bit, because I don't really care for cold colors. So I use just a little bit of Asphaltum just to tone things. I don't want to drastically change the color, but I do want to tone it a little bit. And so a quick float of heavily thinned Asphaltum will do that for you. And so look at how deep and rich those colors get when you do that. Kind of plays up the violet tones in that. Pretty, pretty. I use Asphaltum an awful lot. If you paint anything of mine, you know that. So I'm going to pause for just a sec. Sorry about that. I had to go get something. So I have, sitting in front of me, I have a product called Mixion Relief, which is an adhesive. This is for gold leaf and for gold foils. So I'm going to add a little detail to this with that. Not because it's essential, but because it's fun and it adds a little bit of bling to things. So we are going to be using a little bit of this. But before we get to that, we want to take a crack at this lettering. Now, as I said, you can use the decoupage method for this, or you can use a brush. The one that I'm using is a 10-aught rigger, which means it's a very small brush. And this is what I use for lettering. So I'm thinning out my paint with a little bit of Jo Sonja's. And I'm going to paint my lettering. I know it looks like a liner. It isn't. It's a rigger. It has a square chisel edge, much like a flat brush. So it makes doing lettering very, very easy. And it does take a little bit of practice, I will say that. It does take some practice to get used to using it. But you will find that once you have used a rigger to do lettering, you won't want to use anything else because it's just such a great brush for this. So it's easy. Tap onto the chisel edge. If you press down, the brush will open up, and as you release pressure, it will come back up onto the chisel edge. And it is an ideal little brush for lettering. Now, you can paint your lettering in, or you can use the decoupage method that I just showed you. Or I haven't showed you yet, I should say, that I just talked about. There's a number of different ways you can do this. If you don't feel like doing it this way and you don't particularly care for the decoupage method, you could use stamps. Use an alphabet stamp and put it on. There's 100 different ways that you could put your lettering on. And they all look great. I'm a fan of brush lettering, but that's just me. I just like the look of it. And I'm comfortable with it. Not everybody is. That's why I prefer to have options available in these patterns so that you're not obligated to do something you're not particularly comfortable with. So it's nice to have an option. There we go. So there is our Have Faith. I'm going to dry this, and I'm going to add a few shadows to my background and some highlights as well. So I'm going to dry this really quick. And I'm using my 3/8 angle and some heavily thinned asphaltum. And I'm just going to put a little highlight, or sorry, a little shadow to the right side of my lettering. And it's a very rudimentary shadow, nothing fancy, just like that. So it's always on the right side of the letter in this particular case, because our light source is here on the left. So little shadow. Again, we don't really need to worry about them being absolutely perfect because it's not necessary. Just want to get a few little shadows in. And then I want to take that asphaltum and add a few shadows to the edges of my surface. I'm a big fan of this. I like aging my edges a little bit. That's not to say that I want it done everywhere, just in a few places. So I tend to go into corners, you know. I just find that those little shadows frame up your main element quite nicely. There we go. So I'm going to dry this. I've always been a fan of the shadows on edges. It just works for me. Oh, so pretty. So I'm going to use my favorite gel pen. I am a big fan of the squiggly line. I use the squiggly line a lot in my artwork. I don't like hard, heavy outlines. And so my outlines tend to be quite sketchy, I think is a good word for it. And they don't have to be perfect. This pen seems to be out of ink. So I'll switch to the other one. Here we go. Oh, much better. Not. I have a knack today of finding the pens that don't have ink. This one is getting low too. Good heavens. There we go. My stars. I like those irregular lines, those imperfect, scribbly lines. They keep the design from looking too heavy. I don't like heavy outlines. I'm 3 for 3 today. I found another one that isn't functioning properly. Oh, there we are. Oh, Lord. I knew sooner or later I'd find one that works. Ever have one of these days where everything you pick up doesn't seem to want to work? That's my day today. I have picked up pens that didn't work, markers that were dry. I picked up a brush that I've been using constantly recently, and the head fell off because I left it in water overnight. I've just been an absolute train wreck. So look at this. I love these little sketchy lines. They don't have to be heavy. They don't have to be dark. And they don't even have to be directly on the outline of the piece that you're working on, as long as they're, this is where close is good enough. So I just continue and put that light sketchy line on everything all the way around. Now, these are faint because this is a very fine pen. This is a 0.38, so it's a very fine outline. And I like the fact that it's not, this bold, Sharpie-like hard edge. I like that softer, scribbly edge on things. Neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all cost. And that's the fun part of this. Now you could, if you prefer, not use this method. You can use whatever method appeals to you. If you prefer to do it with a Sharpie or even with a brush, by all means. You can do whatever your heart desires. This, I guess, would fall into a mixed media category, but it's light, it's fun, it works up quickly. There's a very comfortable margin for error. You don't have to beat yourself up if things don't look or work exactly the way you think they should. It's a very forgiving technique. So I've got all of my squiggly lines on. I did go and get my gold paint pen because I like finishing my edges with my gold paint pen. And that's pretty simple. I use mine so that it's right on the corner of the surface. And so it leaves like a little border all the way around on the front of the surface. Because I like seeing that little bit of gold. I like it, I like it. Just like that. So I'm going to dry this, and then I'm going to show you how to work with this adhesive. It's surprisingly easy. Everybody always assumes it's going to be difficult, but it really isn't. So I want to make sure this is good and dry. I mean, I'm hitting it out of the park today. I've picked up 3 empty pens. Good heavens. So, make sure that's good and dry. Now, this, as I said, is an adhesive, and it comes with your point already on it. All you have to do is puncture the tube to allow it to come out the point. Then squeeze it on your palette until some of the adhesive begins to come out. And then you're going to use that to add your little curly cues. I like curly cues. I put them on everything. So I'm just using that to add my curly cues. You can also, if you want, add some little dots to the center of your flower. You can add little details to your leaves, just on the center vein, like so. And then you just let it dry. And the nice part about this particular product is that you can force it dry, so I'm going to do that. It comes out of the tube opaque white. It does dry fairly quickly, depending on how heavy your application is. It can be dry in as little as 5 or 10 minutes. But if it's quite humid in your place, it could take longer. The only recommendation that I make is that if it's still showing white, don't try to put your gold foil on yet. It has to be completely clear. If it's not, then you're just going to end up making a mess because it's not going to stick. But this is actually drying very quickly. That's one of the nice things about a heat gun. So we're almost there. It's going to just take a couple minutes longer. You can still see there's little white dots there in the center. But it's getting there. Now, if you do this and you leave it to dry overnight, that's fine. Usually you can get away with about 24 hours. Anything longer than that, you're going to start losing the tackiness, the stickiness. So this is just a gold foil. You can get this on Amazon. It's very inexpensive. It's called Deco Foil. And you're going to put the silver side onto your adhesive, like so. And then just burnish it. You can use your fingertips. Oops, wasn't quite dry. Oh goodness, there we go. So you can press it. You can see that I'm getting some pretty gold on those little areas where I put the adhesive. And a couple areas where it just dried too quickly. There we go. So just that little press of the foil on top of that adhesive, it adds a nice little bit of sparkle to things. I love that little shimmery metallic. Look how pretty. And one little piece of this foil goes a very long way. You can do a lot with this little bit. There we go. So we've added a little bit of foil. Ooh, look at that. Got our little bit there in the center. Just a little gold detail in there. Now you can spatter this. I like to spatter it with a little bit of warm white and a little bit of asphalt, maybe a little bit of lamp black. I just like how it looks when it's done. And it kind of gives it that vintagey look. So I'm going to spatter with a little bit of warm white first. Just a little. I do love spatter. I won't apologize for it. I do love my spatter. And I'm going to use a little bit of lamp black because I kind of like that more vintage look. I don't want to be too heavy-handed with it because I find it can get heavy. It gets too dark, and I don't like that. There we go. A little bit of lamp black. And then you can use a little bit of asphaltum too, if you want to. I think I'm going to stop there, though. I think I've got enough asphaltum on there. And that is how we do our Have Faith. It's a fun, really easy, very forgiving technique using Decor Media Fluid Acrylic. Again, I kept it to a simple palette. I don't like overdoing the color palette. Cobalt teal hue, some translucent white, quinacridone magenta or primary magenta, green gold, and sap green. So short color palette. And then for the Americanas, some pretty basics as far as I'm concerned. You got some lamp black, a little bit of warm white, and of course my all-time favorite, a little bit of asphaltum. And you can use your favorite. My favorite is Jo Sonja's Fast Dry Glaze Medium, or you can use water. It's a simple technique. It works up really quick. And again, you can do a variety of methods for putting in that letter. If you don't want to do the brush lettering, you can use decoupage. And if you look in your pattern, you'll be able to see that it has a variety of word choices. So if Have Faith doesn't appeal to you, perhaps something else in the pattern will. So that is your project for the month of May. I'll apologize now for being a little bit late getting it to you. But you know what? Have a little faith. You're going to have some fun with this. Take care. I'll see you again soon.